The humid August evening in Phoenix felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. Inside the packed arena, 15,000 supporters roared as Donald Trump stepped up to the podium, his signature red tie slightly askew, sweat beading on his forehead under the blazing lights. What happened next would send shockwaves through the highest levels of American government and leave one of the most respected presidents in modern history questioning everything he believed about political discourse. Trump's eyes scanned the crowd with predatory intensity. He had been building to this moment for months, each rally more venomous than the last. But tonight was different. Tonight, he would cross a line that even his closest advisers had begged him not to cross. The teleprompter displayed his prepared remarks, but Trump's finger hovered over his phone, where a different message awaited, one that would detonate like a nuclear bomb in the political landscape. "You know, folks," Trump began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of bravado and resentment that had become his trademark, "we've been too nice for too long. Too respectful to people who frankly don't deserve our respect." The crowd stirred, sensing something unprecedented was about to unfold. Trump paused, letting the anticipation build like a master showman, before delivering the words that would haunt Barack Obama's family for months to come. In that moment, Trump didn't just attack Obama's policies or his presidency. He didn't limit himself to the usual political theater that Americans had grown accustomed to. Instead, he launched a deeply personal assault that struck at the very core of Obama's identity as a father, a husband, and a man. The words cut through the air like shattered glass, each syllable designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. The crowd's initial cheer gave way to stunned silence as even Trump's most ardent supporters realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in American political history. 700 miles away, in the quiet sanctuary of his Chicago home, Barack Obama sat in his study, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face as news alerts flooded his phone. Michelle was upstairs, helping Malia with college preparations, their daughter's laughter drifting down the hallway, a stark contrast to the venom that was about to shatter their evening peace. The first notification came at 9:47 p.m. Then another. Then a flood of messages from staffers, friends, and family members, each more urgent than the last. Obama's hand trembled slightly as he clicked on the video link, his jaw tightening with each passing second of Trump's tirade. This wasn't politics anymore. This was warfare, and Trump had just declared war on everything Obama held sacred. The attack wasn't just about his presidency or his policies. Trump had gone after Obama's family, his character, his very essence as a human being. Words that no president, current or former, should ever have to hear about themselves or their loved ones echoed through Obama's study. The carefully constructed world of post-presidential dignity that Obama had built began to crumble around him. Michelle appeared in the doorway, her face pale after receiving her own barrage of concerned calls. "Barack," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of their hearts breaking in real time. Obama looked up at his wife of over 3 decades, the woman who had stood by him through every triumph and scandal of their political journey, and saw something in her eyes he had never seen before: genuine fear. The phone rang. Then again. Soon, both their devices were buzzing constantly with calls from Secret Service, former staffers, and political allies, all asking the same question. How was Obama going to respond to an attack that had crossed every conceivable line of political decency? As the former president sat in the darkness of his study, surrounded by the photos and mementos of a life dedicated to public service, he faced the most crucial decision of his post-presidency. Stay silent and let the attack stand, or respond and risk escalating a conflict that could tear the country apart even further. The clock struck midnight, and Barack Obama realized that everything was about to change. The morning sun filtered through the bulletproof windows of Obama's Chicago home, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the chill that had settled over the household. Barack sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he had celebrated election victories, comforted his daughters through teenage heartbreak, and shared countless quiet moments with Michelle. Now, it felt like a war room. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since 5 a.m. David Axelrod's name flashed on the screen for the 7th time in 30 minutes. Valerie Jarrett had left 4 voicemails. Even Joe Biden had called, his voice heavy with concern and barely contained rage. But Obama couldn't bring himself to answer. Not yet. He needed to think, to process what had happened, and to decide how a former president should respond to an attack that had shattered every norm of political decency. Michelle descended the stairs, her usual morning grace replaced by visible exhaustion. She had spent most of the night fielding calls from friends, family members, and concerned supporters, each conversation more emotionally draining than the last. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of a woman who had been pushed beyond her breaking point. "The girls know," she said quietly, pouring herself coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "Malia called at 6 this morning, crying. She saw it on social media before we could warn her." The weight of those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Their daughters, whom they had fought so hard to protect from the ugly realities of political life, had been dragged into a nightmare not of their making. Obama's jaw clenched. Throughout 8 years in the White House, he had endured personal attacks, racial slurs whispered in political corridors, and conspiracy theories that questioned his very citizenship. But this was different. This was an assault on his family, on his children, on the very foundation of who he was as a man. The Secret Service had already increased security around both Malia and Sasha, a grim reminder that words could have real-world consequences. The kitchen fell silent except for the distant hum of security equipment and the occasional car passing on their quiet Chicago street. Obama stared at his reflection in the dark coffee, seeing a man he barely recognized. The composed, eloquent leader who had inspired millions now sat broken at his own kitchen table, struggling with a decision that could define the rest of his life. "What would your grandmother say?" Michelle asked softly, knowing exactly which emotional chord to strike. Madeline Dunham, or Toot as Obama had called her, had been his moral compass, the woman who taught him that dignity wasn't just about how you carried yourself in victory, but how you responded when someone tried to tear you down. Obama closed his eyes, remembering Toot's weathered hands holding his young face after a particularly brutal day at school, when classmates had mocked his mixed heritage and questioned where he belonged. "Barack," she had said in her gentle but firm voice, "never let someone else's ugliness make you ugly. But never let them mistake your kindness for weakness either." The wisdom felt both comforting and challenging. Staying silent felt like betrayal, not just to himself, but to every person who had believed in him, who had seen him as a symbol of hope and dignity in American politics. Yet responding meant escalating a conflict that could consume not just him and Trump, but the entire country. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Nancy Pelosi, followed immediately by Chuck Schumer, then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The entire Democratic establishment was mobilizing, waiting for his lead, looking to him for guidance on how to respond to this unprecedented attack. Some wanted blood. Others counseled restraint. All of them wanted an answer from the man who had once promised to be the adult in the room. But perhaps the most painful call came from an unexpected source. John McCain, despite their political differences and his own battle with brain cancer, had left a message that brought tears to Obama's eyes. "Barack," the gravelly voice said, "what happened last night was beneath the dignity of any American, let alone someone holding the highest office. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Whatever you decide, you have allies who will stand with you." As Obama sat in the growing morning light, surrounded by the symbols of a life well lived but now under siege, he realized that silence was not an option. The question was no longer whether to respond, but how to respond in a way that honored both his family's pain and his country's need for leadership. The weight of that decision would crush a lesser man. But Barack Obama was about to prove that even in his darkest hour, he remained exactly who America needed him to be. At exactly 3:17 p.m. Eastern Time, Barack Obama pressed send on a message that would forever change the landscape of American political discourse. But this wasn't a hastily written tweet fired off in anger, nor a carefully sanitized statement crafted by political consultants. This was something entirely different, a masterpiece of moral leadership delivered through a medium that Trump had claimed as his own. Obama had chosen Instagram Live, a platform that would allow him to speak directly to millions of Americans without the filter of traditional media or the limitations of character counts. Within minutes of the notification going out, viewers began flooding in by the hundreds of thousands. The counter climbed relentlessly. 500K, 750K, 1 million, then 2 million Americans tuning in to hear how their former president would respond to the most vicious personal attack in modern political history. The camera revealed Obama sitting in his Chicago study, but this wasn't the broken man who had sat in darkness just 48 hours earlier. This was the Barack Obama who had commanded the world stage for 8 years, who had delivered eulogies for children killed in school shootings and speeches that had moved nations to tears. His voice was steady, his gaze direct, his presence filling the screen with an authority that transcended the small confines of a phone camera. "My fellow Americans," he began, and immediately millions of viewers felt something they hadn't experienced in years, the comfort of being addressed by a leader who still believed in their better angels. "I want to talk to you today not as a former president, but as a father, a husband, and a citizen who loves this country deeply." Obama paused, letting the weight of those words settle across a nation that had grown accustomed to leaders who spoke only to their base, who saw fellow Americans as enemies to be conquered rather than neighbors to be served. The view count had now passed 3 million and was climbing exponentially as people shared the link across every social media platform. 2 nights ago, someone holding the highest office in our land chose to attack not just me, but my family, in ways that go beyond the boundaries of political discourse and human decency. My daughters, who have done nothing but try to make their father proud while living under the microscope of public life, were subjected to cruelty that no child should ever endure. For the first time in the broadcast, Obama's composed facade cracked slightly, his voice catching as he mentioned his daughters. Millions of parents watching felt their own hearts break, imagining their children subjected to such public humiliation. The comments section exploded with hearts, prayers, and expressions of outrage on behalf of the Obama family. But then Obama did something that stunned both his supporters and his critics. Instead of launching into a devastating counterattack that everyone expected, instead of using his legendary rhetorical skills to destroy Trump with the same personal venom he had received, Obama took a different path entirely. "But I'm not here to respond to those attacks with attacks of my own. I'm here because I believe we are better than this. I'm here because our children are watching, and they deserve to see what real strength looks like in the face of hatred." The transformation was electric. Obama wasn't just defending himself. He was modeling a different way of being human in public life. He began to speak about the values that had sustained him through his darkest moments. The lessons learned from his grandmother, the wisdom gained from his community organizing days in Chicago, the responsibility that comes with being given a platform to speak to the nation. Strength isn't about who can inflict the most pain with their words. Strength is about lifting people up when they're down, about protecting the vulnerable, about remembering that even our political opponents are fellow Americans deserving of basic human dignity. As Obama continued speaking, something remarkable began happening across social media. Republicans who had opposed him politically began sharing the video, praising his dignity under fire. Democrats who had sometimes criticized him for being too restrained were in awe of his moral authority. Even international leaders began commenting on the stark contrast between this response and the attack that had prompted it. The view count had now surpassed 10 million, making it one of the most watched political addresses in social media history. News networks were breaking into regular programming to cover the live stream, while political commentators across the spectrum struggled to find adequate words to describe what they were witnessing. Obama concluded with words that would be quoted in history books for generations to come. "To those who would tear us apart with their hatred, I say this: you do not represent the America I know. The America I know is better than your worst impulses. The America I know chooses hope over fear, unity over division, and love over hate. That America is still here, and it always will be, because that America lives in the hearts of people who refuse to let darkness define their light." When the live stream ended after exactly 17 minutes, the silence across America was deafening. Then came the flood: shares, comments, articles, and reactions that would dominate news cycles for weeks to come. Obama had done more than defend himself. He had reminded an entire nation what presidential leadership looked like, and in doing so, had delivered the most devastating response possible. He had shown Trump exactly what he would never be. Within 30 minutes of Obama's live stream ending, the impossible happened. For the first time in over a decade of bitter political division, America seemed to speak with one voice. The response transcended party lines, demographics, and ideological boundaries in ways that political scientists would study for generations to come. The numbers told only part of the story. Obama's Instagram Live had been viewed over 15 million times within the first hour, making it the most watched political address in social media history. But the real impact was measured in something far more profound: the collective exhale of a nation that had forgotten what dignified leadership looked like under pressure. In newsrooms across the country, seasoned political reporters found themselves struggling to maintain their professional objectivity. CNN's Anderson Cooper, known for his measured analysis, broke down on live television as he described watching Obama's response with his own children. "This is what we've been missing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what it looks like when a leader chooses to heal rather than hurt." Fox News found itself in an unprecedented position. Several of their most prominent hosts, who had spent years criticizing Obama's policies, couldn't find fault with his response. Tucker Carlson, in a moment that shocked his audience, admitted on air that, regardless of political differences, what we witnessed today was genuine class in the face of classlessness. But perhaps the most stunning reactions came from within Republican circles. Senator Mitt Romney, who had run against Obama in 2012, issued a statement calling the response a masterclass in presidential dignity that every American, regardless of party, should aspire to emulate. Even more shocking, several Republican governors began distancing themselves from Trump's original attack, with Texas Governor Greg Abbott stating that personal attacks on families cross a line that no American leader should cross. The international response was equally unprecedented. World leaders who had maintained careful diplomatic silence during America's political turmoil suddenly felt compelled to speak. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted simply, "This is the America we remember and respect." French President Emmanuel Macron called Obama's response a reminder of why American leadership once commanded global admiration. In coffee shops, offices, and homes across America, conversations that hadn't happened in years began to unfold. Democrats who had criticized Obama for being too measured during his presidency found themselves in awe of his restraint and moral authority. Republicans who had opposed his policies were forced to confront the stark contrast between his dignified response and the attack that had prompted it. The social media landscape, typically a battlefield of partisan warfare, transformed into something resembling actual discourse. The hashtag #ThisIsStrength began trending worldwide, with millions of Americans sharing their own stories of choosing dignity over retaliation in the face of personal attacks. Teachers reported using Obama's response as a teaching moment in classrooms across the country, helping children understand that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. But the most significant shockwave reverberated through Trump's own inner circle. Sources close to the White House reported that several senior advisors had urged the president to issue an apology, warning that his attack had backfired spectacularly. The contrast between his crude insults and Obama's elevated response had created a political disaster that even Trump's most loyal supporters couldn't defend. For the first time in his political career, Trump found himself unable to respond effectively. His usual tactics of doubling down on controversial statements or deflecting with new outrages seemed inadequate in the face of Obama's moral authority. His Twitter account remained uncharacteristically quiet for 3 days, as advisors reportedly removed his phone to prevent further damage. The ripple effects extended far beyond politics. Mental health professionals reported that Obama's message had provided comfort to millions of Americans who had felt hopeless about the state of their country's discourse. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist at Johns Hopkins, noted that President Obama's response provided something our nation desperately needed: proof that it's possible to respond to hatred without becoming hateful ourselves. Churches across America reported record attendance the Sunday following Obama's response, with pastors incorporating his message about choosing love over hate into their sermons. Community organizations saw spikes in volunteer applications as Americans sought ways to channel their renewed sense of hope into positive action. Perhaps most importantly, the response seemed to awaken something that many had feared was lost forever: the belief that American political discourse could be elevated, that leaders could model grace under pressure, and that the country's better angels could still prevail over its worst impulses. As America processed what it had witnessed, one thing became clear: Barack Obama hadn't just defended his family's honor or delivered a political counterpunch. He had reminded an entire nation of what it meant to be truly strong, truly presidential, and truly American. In doing so, he had delivered the most devastating response imaginable, not through cruelty, but through an overwhelming demonstration of the dignity that his attacker would never possess. The shockwaves would continue for months, but their message was immediately clear. Even in America's darkest political moment, hope could still triumph over hate, and class could still prevail over chaos.